I used to believe a cup of tea meant love. Warm hands, soft conversation, the gentle steam rising between us like a silent ritual after a long day. That's what tea had always meant in our house. Something familiar. Something kind, until it wasn't. The rain had started early that afternoon. I remember because I watched it for too long through the kitchen window, my hands resting on the cool edge of the sink. I was supposed to be preparing the week's meal plan, chicken lentils, some frozen spinach Greg insisted we use, but I couldn't focus. The screen on my laptop had gone dark 20 minutes ago, and I hadn't moved to wake it. My mind had been foggy lately. Not the kind of fog that comes from lack of sleep, but a thicker kind. A sluggish underwater sort of feeling that clung to me even after a hot shower or a cup of coffee. Greg came into the kitchen like he always did around 8. "Rough day?" he asked, nudging the refrigerator door closed with his elbow. "You look pale." He always said that. Lately, I always did. "Just tired," I muttered, not looking up. He kissed the top of my head and reached for the kettle. "I'll make the tea tonight," he said, as if it were some small act of devotion. "Chamomile with a little honey." "You like that, right?" I nodded. I didn't tell him I hadn't actually tasted the honey in weeks. Or that the tea always seemed bitter, like it came laced with something not quite real. As the water began to boil, I returned to my laptop. I forced myself to read a few lines of the spreadsheet my manager had sent me. Quarterly forecast numbers. I used to be quick with these snap judgments, clean formatting decisions made in 30 minutes. Now, it took me twice that time just to figure out what column I was in. Greg placed the mug in front of me like he always did, same white ceramic, same side of the handle facing me. His smile was soft and it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You need to slow down, babe," he said. "You're burning yourself out." He said it gently, but there was something rehearsed in his voice, like he'd practiced those words, like he needed me to believe it was just burnout. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, but I didn't lift it. Instead, I watched him walk over to the couch, open his tablet, and begin scrolling. His eyes flicked up once to check on me, and I quickly lowered mine to the tea. When he wasn't looking, I poured it down the sink. The tea swirled dark and cloudy against the white porcelain. A faint smell of lemon drifted up, but it was drowned by something sharper underneath. Something metallic. Faint but real. I rinsed the cup, carefully dried it, and placed it on the counter like nothing had happened. That night, I didn't fall asleep the way I had every other night that month. I didn't feel my limbs go heavy. I didn't forget the moment the light went out. My body didn't betray me. Instead, I lay in bed wide awake, my heart racing, my mind darting between memory and suspicion. There had been signs, hadn't there? I'd forgotten to send payroll on the 15th. Missed 2 meetings in a week. Left the oven on overnight. I'd almost backed the car into our own mailbox. And yet each time Greg had shrugged and said, "It's just stress, Rach. The whole city's burning out." But it wasn't just stress, not anymore. My mind had never felt like this before, fuzzy in the mornings. Numb by 3 p.m. Like I was slipping away from myself a little more each day. And all the while Greg made the tea. Every night. Without fail, something inside me shifted. I watched the ceiling in the dark and whispered to myself, "This isn't stress. This is chemical." It was a quiet truth, but it fit too perfectly. I remembered how I used to trust him. How I'd never once asked what was in the tea. How he always stirred it while my back was turned. How he always insisted on preparing it himself. A gust of wind hit the windows and the blinds rattled faintly. Greg was asleep beside me, his breath steady, his chest rising in that peaceful rhythm I used to find comforting. I turned onto my side, facing away from him. Earlier that evening, I'd caught him lingering too long over my laptop. I'd come back from the bathroom and seen him at my desk, fingers hovering near the trackpad, the screen still open to my personal email. He looked up and smiled too quickly. Shut the laptop like it had burned him. "I was just checking if it was charging," he'd said. It wasn't. I hadn't believed him. Not then, not anymore. I lay still and listened to the silence. My mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I could feel the clarity returning like oxygen. My limbs tingled not with drowsiness, but with alertness. With certainty. The next time he brought the tea, I wouldn't drink it, but I would pretend I did. Because if he wanted me asleep, then I needed to see what he did while I wasn't. I didn't tell anyone else. Not my coworkers. Not my sister back in Oregon. Not even the therapist I used to see when my father passed, the one who used to say things like grief has no map. I hadn't seen her in over a year anyway. But Nina, I could tell Nina. She was the only one who wouldn't flinch. I stepped into her pharmacy on a Thursday morning just after 9. The place had barely opened, and I could still smell the faint trace of bleach and lavender from her nightly cleaning. Nina always opened herself. Said she didn't trust anyone else to stack the shelves or calibrate the dosage drawer correctly. The space was small, 2 aisles of supplements and vitamins, a modest fridge in the back with eye drops and insulin pens, and a cheerful counter scattered with lozenges, allergy cards, and hand-labeled herbal teas. Nina liked to keep things personal. Rachel. Her voice came from behind a wall of amber bottles. She peeked around the corner. Didn't expect to see you here before 10. I smiled faintly. Needed to restock my magnesium. That's what they say for sleep, right? She studied my face. I must have looked worse than I thought. She didn't blink. Just motioned gently toward the door behind the counter. Let's talk outside. We stepped out through the back door into the narrow alleyway Nina often used for deliveries. It smelled like coffee from the cafe next door and something faintly medicinal, eucalyptus, maybe. She leaned against the brick wall and crossed her arms, the sleeves of her lab coat bunched at the elbows. So, she said, tell me. I hesitated, then let the words come. I've been off for months now. Fatigue. Like bone deep. I wake up and feel like I never slept. And it's not just tiredness. I'm foggy. I forget names, steps in my work, passwords I've had for years. Last week I left the oven on for 6 hours and didn't notice. Nina didn't interrupt. And every time I feel that way, I continued, I realize it always starts the same way after I drink the tea. Her brow lifted slightly. Tea, I nodded. Greg makes it. Every night. Same time, same mug. Jasmine green. He's always so gentle about it. You've had a long day, babe. Let me take care of you. I used to think it was sweet, and now I don't drink it. Nina tilted her head. What happened when you stopped? I exhaled. The night I poured it down the sink, I didn't pass out. I lay in bed for hours. My body felt alert. My brain kept spinning. It was the first time in weeks I remembered what it felt like to be awake. Nina pushed off the wall and opened the side door that led to her private office, a narrow room with 2 chairs, a file cabinet, and a corkboard pinned with medical articles and postcards from patients. She sat. I followed. She reached for a notepad, uncapped a pen, and glanced at me. All pharmacist now. Same tea every night, yes. Same mug. Blue ceramic little chip near the rim. Same time, usually right after I brush my teeth. Around 10:15. Who makes it? I didn't answer right away. She waited. Greg, I said finally. Always Greg. She scribbled something down, then looked at me, serious now. Rachel, sedatives dissolve fast. Some in under 10 seconds. And most don't change taste if the dose is low. Especially in hot liquids. I swallowed hard. You think I don't think anything yet, but I do know how easy it is for something like that to go unnoticed. Especially if the ritual never changes. The word ritual sat heavy between us. Nina tapped the pen once, twice. Don't drink it again, she said softly. But don't stop the routine either. I looked at her. If he's used to seeing you drink it, don't change that. Act normal. Pour it somewhere else. The sink, a plant. Just don't let it touch your lips. Something inside me clenched. Not fear, more like the slow snap of denial breaking apart. I nodded. She went on. And, if you can, keep track of how you feel each time. I can help test samples if you can save a bit of the liquid. But truth is, most sedatives break down fast. almost impossible to trace unless caught early. I looked down at my hands in my lap. They felt foreign. Weak. When did I start needing someone to tell me how to protect myself? I asked more to myself than to her. Nina reached into the drawer behind her and took out a small zip pouch. It was transparent. Inside was a tiny dropper bottle and 2 testing strips neatly labeled. "It's not foolproof," she said. "But it's something. If the color changes, take a picture. Save it. Date and time." She handed it to me like it was something precious. Maybe it was. We sat in silence for a moment. Just the hum of the cooler, the faint creak of the pharmacy door opening and closing behind some customer we couldn't see. Nina leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "Rock. Do you feel safe at home?" The question shouldn't have startled me, but it did, because I had no answer. I tried to smile, but it didn't land. "I don't know," she nodded like she understood. "Start with pretending. Pretend to sip. Pretend to sleep. Just observe." Her tone wasn't scared, it was trained composed. The kind of calm that came from years of dealing with worst-case scenarios and knowing how to stay 2 steps ahead. We hugged briefly before I left. Outside, the sky had dimmed and cafe lights next door glowed like low embers. I stood there a second longer, clutching the zip pouch in my coat pocket. If Greg was capable of this, slowly erasing me from the inside out with a cup of tea, what else was he planning? That night, as I walked home through the misty streets, I felt more awake than I had in months. And I knew one thing for sure: he would bring the tea again, and this time I'd be ready. Some people hide weapons. Greg hid passwords. He hid them in the middle of normal sentences, behind compliments, buried in calendar invites I didn't remember accepting. That night I played my part. I took the tea he handed me with both hands. He smiled, same as always. "Warm, easy. Drink it while it's hot, babe," he said. Then he kissed the top of my head and went to brush his teeth. I stood at the edge of the living room for a beat, 2 long fingers tightening around the mug. The steam curled up like a ribbon, same floral scent. Same off-white cup with the hairline crack near the handle. I walked into the kitchen, turned the faucet on just enough to hum and poured it into the peace lily. A little splash, nothing loud. I tipped the cup gently, let a sip's worth stay at the bottom. Just enough to stain my lips later if he checked. I rinsed my mouth. Dried the mug with the dish towel. By the time Greg came out, I was sitting on the bed with the cup beside me. He gave me a soft nod, pulled the covers back, and slid in beside me. "You really should try to get some sleep tonight," he said, his voice already softening into drowsiness. "You've been so wired lately." I smiled with my mouth, not my eyes. "I will," I whispered. "Just give me a second." He turned his back and settled in. I laid down slowly, closed my eyes, and waited. I counted slowly in my head. 10, 20, 30. Then came the sound. Soft, careful. The creak of our bedroom door easing open, followed by the hush of bare feet on hardwood. A pause. Then a whisper. "You asleep?" I didn't move. Didn't breathe differently. Just let my chest rise and fall the way I'd practiced earlier that day, lying still with Nina in her office, learning how to sleep without sleeping. Greg lingered. Then I heard him exhale just a little and walk away. The door eased shut. A few seconds later, the faintest click reached me. The sound of our living room laptop waking from sleep. I slid one eye open. Darkness. Then a sliver of hallway light spilling across the rug. I waited another beat. Then turned slow as molasses, just enough to peek between the curtains of our bedroom door. Greg was a shadow in the other room. Head tilted down toward the screen. The glow of the laptop lit half his face, calm-focused. Like he was working late the way he always said he was. Only tonight he wasn't opening emails. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out a flash drive. I knew that flash drive. Black, unmarked. He kept it in the drawer beneath his socks. I'd seen it once months ago when putting away laundry. He said it was just old tax stuff, but now he plugged it in. His fingers moved with ease navigating folders I didn't recognize. One labeled Rowan, another transfer, Deck, and then Holdco forms, FL, Florida. He wasn't from Florida, neither was I. A new window opened. Bank records. My name at the top corner. I watched him copy entire directories. I didn't know what most of it meant, but I recognized my own W-2S, screenshots of my brokerage accounts, verification steps from my identity app. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't passive curiosity. This was precision. Greg wasn't just snooping. He was building something. And whatever it was, it had my name on it. Greg leaned in closer to the screen. His face was still almost expressionless. But I noticed the tiny movements, his thumb rubbing the spacebar, his knee bouncing once then stopping. He moved quickly now. Opened a new folder. This one was labeled Florida LLC, active. My heart stopped. He clicked it. Inside were PDFs, contracts, articles of incorporation. One with a signature line already filled my name written in digital ink. Rachel Myles, Managing Director. I couldn't breathe. He wasn't just collecting my documents, he was using them. Creating an entire business entity with me at the helm, legally at least. I watched him scan another file. He pulled up what looked like a lease agreement, an office suite in Miami. Then a document authorizing wire transfers. The amounts made my stomach clench. Tens of thousands. One for $84,000. Another pending for $112,500. I didn't even know we had that kind of money. Or rather, I did. It was mine. Savings from before Ellie's surgery. The insurance settlement we'd never touched. All in accounts Greg technically didn't have access to. At least I thought he didn't. He minimized the window. Opened my password vault, the app I used to keep everything secure. Typed. Paused. Typed again. And it opened. He didn't even hesitate. That was the moment I knew. He'd been logging into my accounts, studying my patterns. And now he was testing everything, getting ready. A photo file flashed next. He clicked it. There it was, my driver's license. Front and back. Perfectly lit, centered. Where had he gotten it? Then I remembered. The bottom drawer in my study. The one I'd taped shut after filing taxes. I hadn't touched it in months. Greg had. And he'd done more than just find a copy. He'd scanned it. Saved it. Filed it into the same folder where he was building an identity. My identity. But for what, I gripped the edge of the mattress. Hard enough that my knuckles ached. Greg kept working. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't double-checking anything, he already knew what he needed. The way his hands moved told me this wasn't the first time. This had been rehearsed. Then I saw it. He pulled out a small envelope from his jacket. Opened it. Inside, a prepaid debit card. The kind used for transactions that don't leave trails. Next to it, a burner phone. Black. Unregistered. Still in its packaging. My chest tightened. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was preparation. He was setting up a life, and it didn't include me. He checked the time. It was 2:47 a.m. Greg stood up. Walked softly toward the hallway, toward the bedroom. I closed my eyes. Slowed my breathing. He lingered in the doorway. I could feel him watching me. Then he whispered, "Just a little longer." My skin prickled. He walked away again. Back into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open, something placed gently on the counter. Footsteps again. This time headed to the balcony. He lit a cigarette. He only smoked when he was anxious, or when he thought I was asleep. From where I lay, I could see just enough. The orange tip glowed faintly in the dark. His back was to the city lights. Shoulders slumped, left hand still holding the burner phone. Staring at the screen, like he was waiting. Waiting for what? A message, a confirmation. Or maybe permission. My heart thudded louder than the silence around me. This man, the father of my child, The man who brought me tea each night was building an exit plan. From our life. From me. And maybe, just maybe, he needed me out of the way first. The balcony door slid shut. Greg was back inside. I kept still, not a flinch. Not a breath out of place. He walked past the bedroom door. And that's when I heard it. A soft mechanical hum. Barely audible but unmistakable. The printer. We hadn't used it in weeks. Not since he said we'd gone paperless. I counted 3, 4, 5 slow seconds. Then the gentle shuffle of sheets being caught by the tray. I slipped from the bed, barefoot, silent. I moved inch by inch toward the hallway, sticking close to the wall. The light from the office cast thin slats across the hardwood. Greg's shadow moved once, leaned forward, then sat back. I stopped near the corner. Careful. Peered just enough. There it was. A printout half emerged. Greg grabbed it, compared it with something already on the desk. My driver's license, my social security card, my birth certificate copy. All laid out. Like puzzle pieces. Like a life being transferred. Then I saw the heading on the printed sheet: Statement of Dissolution, sole proprietor name Rachel Myles. Below that, a Florida address I didn't recognize. Greg sighed, folded the paper in half. Slipped it into a manila folder marked Next Week. Next week. I backed away, heart pounding, until I reached the bedroom. Slid under the covers just as he turned off the office light. I felt the mattress shift as he lay down beside me. Felt his breath slow, like nothing had happened. Like the man lying next to me wasn't turning me into a ghost on paper. I stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow I'd need to look at everything. That folder. That address. That card. He wasn't just erasing me from our life, he was replacing me. And I had one chance. To make sure I got to the truth first. I always believed the scariest secrets were the ones whispered behind doors. But the real ones. They sit in plain sight in autofill drop-downs and forgotten folders. It was a Tuesday. Late February. Rain pinned itself like tiny needles to our apartment windows in Seattle. Greg said he was going to the gym. Back in '90, he mumbled, kissing my forehead. I nodded. Kept my voice calm. He grabbed his duffel, made some joke about needing cardio more than muscle, and left. The moment the door clicked behind him, I exhaled. A deep, slow breath. Like surfacing. I didn't go straight to his laptop. Not yet. First, I wiped the counters. Rinsed out my own mug, no tea this time, just lukewarm water. A rhythm. A delay. A way to still the nerves before diving into whatever waited inside his machine. When I opened Greg's laptop, it didn't ask for a password. He trusted this apartment too much. Or maybe he never thought I'd stop being too tired to care. The desktop was spotless. Too clean. But then I opened Chrome. History cleared. Private tabs empty. But autofill. That still held fingerprints. I clicked the Gmail login. 2 addresses popped up. One was his usual Greg, Myles at. The second GTM.512. GM at. It looked fake. Almost like spam. I selected it. Typed in the last password. I remembered watching him use a mix of our anniversary date and his college mascot. It worked. There it was. An inbox. Nearly empty, but the sent folder full. Flights. Banking alerts. A confirmation from a boutique hotel in Miami. Then a transfer code to Iberia Airlines. Connecting flight Miami to Madrid. I clicked again. And again. An email from someone named Chelsea Vance, subject line final wire. Body: I transferred the last $50 K. Don't make me look stupid. No signature, no warmth. Just business. Fast. Sharp. I copied everything. Screenshotted the inbox. Opened my own phone and sent each file to Nina one by one. Then I just sat there. The cursor blinked at me like a warning light. Madrid. Not a vacation. An exit. He wasn't planning a betrayal, he was planning a vanishing act. I didn't flinch when I saw Chelsea's name again. Somewhere in the background of Greg's stories, I had heard it before. Chelsea from operations, he once said. Smart girl. Gets things done. Now she was wiring him 50 grand. Now she was part of this. Nina replied within 2 minutes. Her message was short, sharp, Rachel. That email alone is enough to raise red flags. But combined with the transfer, it's a setup. He's building something. You need legal protection now. I sat back in the chair, my spine pressing into the wood. My tea was still untouched. My pulse, though, louder than the rain on the window. I opened another folder Greg had left minimized. It was titled Admin, Notes, innocuous enough. But inside were PDFs, scanned contracts, a scanned image of my driver's license, one I hadn't seen in years from when I still had bangs and wore lipstick to work. I clicked another file. Digital loan application. Filed in my name. My address. My social security number. Greg as primary contact. And under emergency contact Chelsea Vance. My mouth went dry, my fingers trembled over the mouse, not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't just about emptying accounts or gaslighting me into a fog. It was bigger, cleaner, colder. Greg wasn't just planning to erase me. He was planning to replace me. I could hear Nina's voice in my head. Her tone always calm, but this time almost urgent. He's constructing a legal identity out of your life. You have to act like you're 2 steps behind, while getting 5 steps ahead. I knew what she meant. Pretend. Smile. Drink the tea, pour the rest down the drain. Sleep like nothing's wrong. Wait until he leaves the room. Then act. I forwarded the PDFs. Zipped the files. Uploaded a backup to a private cloud I had created that morning under a name Greg didn't know. Then I closed the laptop and looked around. Every part of our apartment was a set. A prop. Even the wedding photo in the hallway, me in that soft lace dress. Greg holding my waist looked like a stock image now. Like it belonged to people who no longer existed, and in a way I didn't. Not to him. The rain had slowed, but my pulse hadn't. I reached for the drawer in the kitchen, one Greg rarely touched, and pulled out a small spiral notebook my dad had given me years ago. Inside were numbers, passwords, and a name I hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. Michael Trent. Dad's old friend. His lawyer. The man who helped settle my father's estate when I was barely out of college. I hadn't talked to him since. But something about his steady handshake and the way he let silence sit before speaking, it stayed with me. I dialed his number slowly, as if the act itself might shatter what little normalcy I had left. Michael Trent speaking. His voice hadn't changed. Still gravel and warmth. I took a breath. Michael. It's Rachel. Rachel Halden. A pause. John's daughter Rachel, is everything all right? I didn't explain right away. I didn't cry. Instead I said I need someone who can act quickly. Quietly. I'm in a situation where someone close to me is trying to make me disappear, on paper at least. Another pause. Then tell me what you have, and don't hold back. So I did. I told him about the forged application. The email transfers. The emergency contact named Chelsea Vance. I told him about the tea. He listened. Didn't interrupt. Only asked once. Do you have copies? Yes. Digital backups. 2 versions, cloud and USB. Good girl. That sentence, so simple, landed like an anchor in my chest. It reminded me of my father. Of being believed. Of being taken seriously. I don't want to start a war, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I just want to protect what's mine and prove what he's done. You don't need to start one, Michael replied. You're already in one. You just haven't fired a shot yet. We arranged to meet Friday morning. Discreetly. His office in Capitol Hill hadn't changed location. When I hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. As if the version of me that had been gaslit and drugged for months had finally sat down at the same table with the version of me that remembered who she was. I closed the notebook. Slid it back into the drawer. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to whisper, I'm not crazy. I'm awake now. I returned to the laptop like it was a crime scene, not in panic methodically, as if every click could expose another layer of betrayal, and it did. I opened the browser. Greg always used Chrome and typed a single letter into the search bar. Just one. G. A flood of autofill suggestions appeared. Gmail. Google Flights, Go Bank. I clicked on Gmail. It was already logged in. Not his usual address. This one was Wentworth.82@gmail.com. Wentworth. Greg had never mentioned that name. It wasn't his middle name. It wasn't his mother's maiden name. But the inbox didn't wait for me to make sense of it, because there it was. Email after email. Dates. Confirmations. Attachments. Your flight SEA MIA is confirmed. Radisson Blu Madrid, your 6-night reservation is ready. Chelsea Vance sent you $50,000 via wire transfer. I didn't gasp. Didn't flinch. I clicked. Opened. Saved PDFs to a secure folder. Every hotel booking. Every money trail. Every step of his exit plan fully mapped. He wasn't just running from me. He was running with someone. Chelsea Vance. The name came up again and again. One message just 3 days old stopped me cold. Greg, I transferred the last $50, like you asked. But don't make me look stupid. If she suspects anything, I'm out. It wasn't just a lover's email. It was a conspirator's warning. And he had told her I was clueless. He'd made her think I was just some sleepy fool still sipping drug tea while they built a future on the bones of my identity. The rage that filled me wasn't fire. It was ice. Still, focused. I copied everything. Zipped the folder, sent it to Nina with one-line emergency. Call when safe. Then I pulled out the tiny blue test kit she gave me. Dipped the strip into last night's leftover tea still in the mug by the sink. Seconds passed. The strip turned light pink. That wasn't normal. Not for chamomile. Not for anything I drank willingly. I took a photo. Labeled it Monday Night Sample. JPG. And I whispered to the empty room. You underestimated me. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, from clarity. At 3:12 a.m. I returned to the laptop, this time with gloves. Not to leave fingerprints. But because somewhere deep inside I realized this was no longer a marriage. It was evidence. One folder caught my eye, titled plainly, Forms. Inside were PDFs. Dozens. Some were old tax files, invoices, and blank applications. But then I saw one with my full name in the file name. Rachel Myles, personal loan application. PDF. I opened it. It had my birth date. My social security number. My employer, except I hadn't worked at that firm in over a year. The income line was inflated. The signature pasted. Not written. I scrolled to the emergency contact field. It listed Chelsea Vance. My stomach didn't drop. It rose right to my throat. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about removal. He hadn't just planned to disappear. He had preloaded a financial identity using mine. He could tank my credit. Take loans. Buy time. Or worse, frame me. Nina called at 7:10, voice tight but steady. Rachel, I've gone through everything. You're not safe. Not legally, not financially. We need to bring in a lawyer. I nodded before she even finished. I already called Michael Trent, I said. My dad's old lawyer. He said to come in this morning. Good, she whispered. He's one of the best. You need paper protection now before Greg gets wind. I closed the laptop slowly. Wrapped it in a scarf like a brittle artifact. Packed a small bag with the essentials: passport, backup drive, one change of clothes. Then I picked up my phone. Typed one final note to myself in the encrypted app Nina had installed for me. He didn't just plan to erase me, he planned to replace me. And beneath it I added a single new line. Not anymore. I dressed like it was a normal night. Jeans, cashmere sweater. A touch of lipstick that hadn't seen daylight in weeks. Greg texted around 5:30. Leaving the gym now. You want Thai or sushi tonight? I replied. Surprise me. I'll set the table. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. The kitchen light cast a golden glow across the marble counters. The dishwasher hummed softly, just like always. And the same blue ceramic teapot sat on the stove spotless. He'd washed it yesterday. Meticulously. I set out 2 plates, cloth napkins. Poured water into our stemless wine glasses, no wine tonight. I didn't want blurred lines. Not tonight. When Greg walked in carrying 2 takeout bags and that familiar grin, he looked relaxed. Like he'd spent the last hour lifting weights, not laundering my identity. He kissed my cheek. Hey babe. You look calm. I smiled. I feel calm. He didn't notice the slight difference in tone. Or maybe he did and didn't want to ask. We sat. He unpacked chicken pad thai and mango rolls. His favorites. Not mine. He poured tea without asking. Same pot, same ritual. The liquid steamed gently, almost mockingly. I didn't flinch. Rough day? He asked, mouth half full. I nodded. Productive, though. Greg leaned back, stretching like a man who owned the evening. He looked around the apartment like it was still his. I took a sip of water, set the glass down gently, and said, by the way, I made an appointment with a lawyer. He stopped mid-chew. Eyes narrowing, but only for a second. A lawyer, he echoed. For what? I kept my gaze steady. My taxes. Some inheritance questions I've been putting off. Thought I'd get ahead of it this year. A pause. Then, good thinking, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Smart to get things sorted early. That was part 1. The surface calm, and under it, the wire tightening. Greg chewed slower now. I watched the way he held his fork, more deliberate, almost rehearsed. You know, he said, I've been meaning to get my financial stuff sorted too. Maybe I should come to that meeting with you. Make it a joint thing. That was new. Greg never cared for details. Receipts bored him. Contracts. He'd leave those to me. So why the sudden interest? I tilted my head like I was thinking. That's thoughtful. But I already booked it solo next Tuesday. Just want to get a read on what I need for myself first. He nodded too quickly. Like he wanted to be seen agreeing. Then came the shift. He reached for his glass of tea, sipped it, and smiled at mine. You haven't touched your tea, he said casually, voice honeyed. My fingers wrapped gently around the warm ceramic mug. I was letting it cool. He took another sip. Didn't break eye contact. Didn't blink. I put a splash of chamomile in yours tonight, he added. Help you sleep. I brought the cup to my lips. Held it there. Let the steam kiss my face. Then set it down again without tasting. Thanks, I said, but I think I'll stay up and read tonight. Brains still wired from all those spreadsheets. Greg gave a short laugh. All right. But don't blame me if you're cranky tomorrow. We both knew what that meant. He was testing the dose. Seeing if I'd take the bait. I kept eating. Inside my stomach churned, but not from food. Greg checked his phone, scrolled absently, then slipped it face down beside his plate. I recognized the motion now. He always flipped it when something or someone was waiting. It vibrated once. Silent. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. And I smiled. Because I already had access. To the backups. To the screen recordings. To the trail of crumbs he left behind. And the woman at the other end of that message, she'd soon learn he wasn't hers either. Greg wiped his mouth with the corner of his napkin. So he said you mentioned someone at work was asking about our apartment. His tone was soft, but the undertone, there was a wire of tension stretched underneath. I raised my eyebrows, pretending I'd forgotten I'd said anything. Oh right. One of the junior analysts, Nora. She's thinking of moving to Queen Anne. Asked if I liked the neighborhood. Greg nodded slowly. Did you mention we're thinking of selling soon? That was unexpected. I tilted my head, pausing just long enough. We are. He smiled the way people do when they've planned something and are hoping you'll catch up. I mean, maybe not selling. Just evaluating. Market strong. Might be smart to consider. My pulse thudded. Selling was never part of our plan. But disappearing, that would require liquid assets. And real estate. That was liquid. I leaned back in my chair, sipping air from my empty wine glass, pretending it still had something to offer. "What brought this on?" I asked lightly. He shrugged, too casual. "You've been so tired. I figured maybe less stress, smaller space. Start fresh. Start fresh." That phrase was a spotlight. It glared. Greg stood to clear the dishes. His hand grazed my shoulder. I didn't flinch, but inside every nerve recoiled. As he rinsed the plates, I glanced at his phone again. Still face down. Still vibrating once every few minutes. I reached for my tea again. Tilted the cup slightly. Let it slosh toward the edge, just enough to wet the coaster. "Oops," I said. "Clumsy tonight." Greg turned slightly. "Don't worry, I'll get it." And as he did, I slipped his phone closer. One glance. That's all I needed. Chelsea V. Confirming hotel for the 6th of March. "I'll handle the check-in. You handle the clean break." He returned just as I slid the phone back. I was smiling again. But not at him. Because I'd just learned the date. The place. And most of all, his language. Clean break. That was how Greg saw me. Something to be swept away. But I had something better than a clean break. I had receipts, and Nina. And a lawyer who still called me kiddo when he picked up the phone. Greg finished wiping the counter, turned back toward me, that fake warmth still flickering. "You okay?" he asked. "You look a little far away." I met his gaze. Let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Just thinking about what to pack if we do move." He smiled again. But I wasn't packing boxes. I was preparing evidence. That night, after Greg fell asleep with his arm flung across the bed like an actor in a bad play, I slipped into the living room. The apartment was still, but not quiet. The dishwasher hummed faintly from the kitchen. Rain ticked against the windows like a clock I couldn't see. I moved softly barefoot, avoiding the creaky board near the hallway. I sat on the couch, turned the television on low for cover sound, and reached for my laptop. Nina had sent me a folder earlier that day. It was titled simply "Redundancy." Inside were scanned forms, a draft of a financial affidavit, and contact information for a forensic accountant. Her message had read, "If he moves funds under your name, we'll see it. Don't blink." I didn't. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and typed in a name I hadn't said aloud in years: Michael Trent, Dad's old lawyer. The one who helped settle his estate after the cancer diagnosis. He had a gruff kindness I never forgot. His office still had the same domain. Still listed in Spokane. Still offered late-night appointments for emergencies. I clicked the contact form but then stopped. I didn't need an assistant to screen me. I needed his voice. So I called. It rang twice. Then Michael Trent speaking. It took me a second. "Mr. Trent. This is Rachel Holden, used to be Rachel Byrne. James Byrne's daughter." There was a pause. Then a shift. "Well now, Rachel. How's that garden of yours?" I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was familiar. Human. It's a balcony garden these days, but the rosemary's still kicking. I'll take that as a win. What's going on? I didn't tell him everything. Not yet, but I told him enough. That I had reason to believe someone was moving money under my name. That it involved forged applications. That I needed to protect my identity fast. He didn't ask for drama, just facts. "You said his name was Greg Holden." "Yes. And he's listed as your spouse on any current legal documents, most. But not all." He made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a sharpened pencil scratching paper. "You need to freeze your credit tonight," he said. "And you need to authorize me access to any joint financial documents first thing tomorrow." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I can drive to Spokane. Tomorrow afternoon." "No need," he said. "I'll meet you halfway. I've got a client near Olympia. Coffee shop off I-5. Noon, I said. "And Mr. Trent, yes. Thank you for not asking if I'm sure." He paused. "Your father once said, If Rachel calls me something's gone real wrong, or she's about to make it right. I remember that. My throat tightened. I ended the call. Then, for the first time in weeks, I didn't crawl into bed like a ghost. I stood at the mirror, looked at myself. Really looked, not tired. Not broken. Not yet. But ready. I opened the hallway closet. The one Greg always said was too crammed to bother with. Behind the coats we never wore and the board games we never played anymore, I found the old garment bag. Black-zipped. Inside the navy pantsuit I wore to my father's while reading. It still smelled faintly of lavender and dry cleaning starch. I laid it across the bed. It fit. A little looser in the shoulders, a little tighter at the hips, but it fit. I pulled my hair back, not for vanity but function. Clarity. In the kitchen drawer, under the mismatched batteries and unused takeout coupons, I found the portable safe Nina had insisted I keep years ago. It clicked open with a code I hadn't used since 2019 Dad's birthday. Inside my passport, a small stash of cash I forgot I even had, and a single silver key labeled Burn S, the safety deposit box in Spokane. I added Greg's printed emails, the flash drive with his Miami transfer plans, and the test strip Nina gave me. Everything went into a sleek brown tote I hadn't carried in years. Then I turned to the coffee table. Greg's tea mug sat there. Still warm. I brought it to the sink. Rinsed it. Let it clatter once, just loud enough. A soft rustle behind me. Greg. In the doorway. Barefoot, sleepy. "You're still up," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I smiled over my shoulder, serene. Just couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. He leaned against the wall, squinting. "You sure you're okay? I've been worried, babe." I nodded, placing the mug upside down in the rack. "Actually, I think I'm finally getting clearer." His eyes searched mine. Maybe for a lie. Maybe for a crack. He found neither. "Good," he said. "That's good." He turned, padding back to bed. I watched him go. Every movement suddenly obvious. Predictable. I'd once built my world around this man. Now I was 3 steps ahead. And counting. As I zipped the tote shut, something clicked inside me. Not fear, not rage. Resolve. I left the living room lights on. Saturday down to draft an email to Chelsea Vance. Just one line. "You might want to ask Greg who the real account holder is." Then I added Mr. Trent's email in BCC. Clicked send. And whispered to no one. This time, he'll be the one waking up confused. Some people call it revenge. I call it restoration. The sun broke gently through the half-open blinds of my new apartment. Queen Anne felt different in the fall. The trees hadn't turned fully yet, but they whispered change, edges touched with rust, wind scented faintly of rain and old books. I was already dressed when the call came. I didn't flinch when the phone rang. Didn't feel my chest tighten. Didn't rehearse a smile. Just reached for it and answered. But it wasn't Michael Trent live, it was his voice. "Rachel, good morning. Everything's finalized. The accounts are back in your name. The emergency freeze is lifted. We also secured the remaining stock options. You're clear. Call if you need anything." That was it. I sat with the phone in my lap for a moment, letting those words sink in. Clear, not free. Not safe. Just clear. The kind of clarity you only notice when you've lived in fog too long. I rose, crossed the room, and opened the balcony door. The morning air slipped in, crisp, damp, fragrant with early fall. From where I stood, I could see a corner of the old bakery Greg used to hate walking by. Now I passed it daily. Sometimes I even stopped in just to smell the fresh sourdough and hear people laugh about nothing important. I didn't need to run anymore, but I did walk. And that morning I walked to the market. The same one Greg always complained about. Too crowded, too noisy, too pointless. But for me, it was memory. It was color. It was mine. The lavender stall was still there. Same woman, same hand-painted sign, organic, dried fresh. She looked up when I stepped close. "Been a while," she said. I smiled. "I'm back," I replied. "And I'm ready to buy too much." She laughed and handed me a bundle before I even asked. "It's on the house," she said. "You look like someone who's just earned a second beginning." I didn't argue. Because I had. Back at my apartment, I placed the lavender by the windowsill. The sun had shifted slightly, brushing the tops of the buildings across the street in a soft gold that made everything feel momentarily untouched. I poured myself a cup of coffee. No tea, not anymore. Then I sat at the small dining table I'd bought secondhand from a couple moving to Arizona. It wobbled slightly on the left leg, but I liked it that way. Imperfect. Real. My laptop was already open. The folder from Michael Trent sat on the desktop, digital copies of everything: legal filings, reversal documents, freeze orders, account reinstatements. I read through each one slowly. The final one had just a subject line: Rachel Byrne versus Gregory Holden, restitution and reassignment agreement. I clicked. Scrolled to the bottom. Typed my full name into the signature field: Rachel Elise Byrne. The cursor blinked once. Then the page refreshed, and it was done. A soft chime told me the signed document had been sent back to Michael automatically. I didn't cheer, didn't cry, just sat still, letting the stillness stretch. And then, on some impulse I didn't question, I put on my coat and walked 3 blocks down, past the hardware store, past the sandwich place Greg used to claim was too hipster. And I stood on the opposite side of the street from our old building. The blinds were drawn. The door buzzer had a new code. And taped to the front window was a laminated sign: for sale, duplex unit recently vacated, private parking. Inquire within. I watched it flutter slightly in the breeze. Watched a squirrel scurry across the stoop where I once cried in the rain because I forgot my keys and Greg wouldn't answer his phone. I crossed my arms, holding the lavender close. Then I turned around, didn't linger. Didn't look back. By the time I got home, the light had shifted again, cleaner now. Sharper. I opened my laptop. Scrolled through folders Greg had once hovered over like a hawk. Found the one labeled MISC receipts, which in Greg's speak meant anything he wanted me to overlook. Inside were files I'd long forgotten: travel logs, reimbursement, PDFs, even a scanned hotel invoice from Madrid that Chelsea had paid for. I highlighted them all. Dragged them into a new folder on my desktop. Renamed it Closure. Then I encrypted it. Moved it to an external drive. And deleted the original from my laptop. No backups. No mirror copies. No more windows left open for someone to crawl through. Not again. I didn't open a bottle of wine. Didn't order a celebratory dinner. Instead, I brewed another cup of coffee, sat on the rug in my living room, and opened a fresh tab on my browser. I clicked through the setup for a new checking account. No joint authorization, no shared access, no emergency contact field with anyone but me. The bank required an initial deposit. I connected the asset transfer number Michael had provided. It took a moment. A soft ping. Then deposit confirmed: $47,000. I blinked. Then blinked again. I scrolled up, double-checked the routing. Yes, it was from one of Greg's shell accounts buried under the Florida LLC documentation. A brokerage asset he must have forgotten to scrub. Or maybe he assumed it was too small to notice. But I noticed. It was mine now. The screen just showed that simple black text against white. Available balance $47, 12.18. I leaned back, exhaled slow. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was the fact that it had his fingerprints all over it yet. Now it sat under my name, my security passphrase, my terms. It felt like a door he forgot to close. And I walked in and turned off the lights behind me. I picked up my phone and texted Nina. One word landed. Her reply came almost instantly: yes. No champagne, just ginger tea. Celebrate like a grown-up. I chuckled to myself. Then typed again. Thank you. For believing me when I barely believed myself. Nina didn't reply right away. But when she did, it was just this. Survivors don't need to scream. They just rebuild. I saved the message. Not just in the chat thread, but in me. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt solid again. Contained. And quiet in the best way. That night, I didn't light candles. Didn't write in a journal. Didn't even turn on music. I sat in the low-lit quiet of my new place, the lavender still fresh by the window, and opened my laptop one last time. The folder Greg had accessed all those months ago was still there, buried under layers he thought I'd never notice. Back then, I hadn't noticed, but now I saw everything. It was labeled innocuously, Home Admin, Archive Do Not Touch. He had clicked through it while I was fake asleep. He had mirrored it to a flash drive. He had tried to recreate my digital presence file by file, password by password. But that version no longer existed. I hovered over the folder. Right-clicked, delete. The warning box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete Home Admin? Archive Do Not Touch. I didn't hesitate. Not this time. Yes. It vanished without drama, no sound, no fanfare. Just gone. Like a door closing softly in the background. Like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I shut the laptop. Rested my palm on the top for a beat longer than needed. Then walked to the kitchen and rinsed out the last mug Greg had ever touched. It was the one with a faint chip near the handle, his favorite, the one he always used when he handed me tea. I didn't smash it. Didn't burn it. I just placed it gently in the donation box by the door. Because even objects deserve freedom when they've served their time. I glanced at the wall clock. It was just past 9 p.m. Too early for bed. Too late to start something new. So I did what I hadn't done in over a year. I sat by the window, pulled the soft knit throw over my knees, and simply let the world go quiet around me. Not to sleep, not to hide, just to be. I never confronted him in person. No dramatic airport chase. No shouting match in a dim hallway. No how could you or why. Because the truth is, he didn't deserve my voice. The last thing I said to Greg was weeks ago in a hallway full of sunlight. I don't even remember the words. Probably something simple like I'll grab the mail. He didn't look up. Didn't sense it was the last time we'd stand side by side. But I knew. That's the difference. Closure doesn't come with grand exits. Sometimes it's just knowing someone will go looking for your shadow and find nothing. In the weeks that followed, I changed every password. Reissued my ID. Locked my credit. Opened a new phone line. Greg never called. Never texted. Not once. Which told me everything I needed to know. He was long gone physically, emotionally, legally. And I was still here. I spent one Saturday morning walking along the lake. There was a vendor selling antique keys, each one in a velvet-lined box, tiny tags tied to their necks. One caught my eye. Worn bronze. Slight bend at the end. The tag read unlocks nothing. Still beautiful, I bought it. Hung it on the hook beside my door, next to the real keys. Because not everything has to function to mean something. That Sunday I went to the market again. Alone. By choice. I bought sunflowers and stone fruit. Sipped a cider from a paper cup. Watched a toddler pull free from her mother's hand to chase a soap bubble. The mother laughed, not scolded. And I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I laughed too. Not because something was funny, but because my body remembered how. By the time I got home, the voicemail light on my phone blinked once. It was Michael. Thought you'd want to know, Rachel. The last shared asset has been sold. Funds are clean. It's all in your name now. My name, my life, my rules. I poured one final cup of coffee. No rituals. No tests, just warmth. Saturday by the window. Watched the sky turn a soft plum before dusk. And I whispered not to anyone but to the space he used to take up in my mind. I didn't need him to pay. I just needed him to disappear. There's a kind of quiet that comes after you've chosen yourself. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's lavender at the Sunday market. It's breathing again without asking permission. What this taught me is simple. When someone chips away at your peace slowly, silently, you don't owe them a storm. You owe yourself a beginning. And beginnings often look like endings until you see the light. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever walked away quietly and finally felt free? Your voice matters here.